Okay, so someone sent us this big stack of materials from RoleCatcher.com. Looks like they're thinking about a career in oceanography.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing field. A lot more to it than most people realize.
That's for sure. So RoleCatcher's supposed to be good at like mapping out career journeys, right?
Yeah, they give you all the details, the skills you need, interview tips, that kind of stuff.
I noticed they had a bunch of example profiles too of people in the field.
Yeah, they have those for pretty much every career stage.
Perfect. Well, for our listener who might be picturing themselves, on some research vessel in the middle of the ocean, let's start with the basics. What does RoleCatcher say are the core areas of oceanography?
Okay, so they break it down into three main areas: physical oceanography, chemical oceanography, and then geological oceanography.
So it's not just about like what's in the ocean, it's like how it moves, what it's made of, even how the ocean floor itself changes over time, right?
Right, exactly. Physical is all about the physics of the ocean, so like currents and tides, that kind of thing.
Oh, right. And how the ocean interacts with the atmosphere, too.
Exactly. And then you've got chemical oceanography. That's looking at the composition of seawater, like salinity.
Oh, yeah. Things like dissolved gases, pollutants, all of that.
Yeah, all that stuff. And then geological oceanography, that's where things get really interesting.
That's the ocean floor stuff.
Yeah, so you're looking at underwater volcanoes, plate tectonics, how the seafloor has evolved over millions of years.
That's a lot. I mean, that's a whole world of specializations, really, all under that one umbrella of oceanography. Speaking of which, where does RoleCatcher say oceanographers actually work?
Yeah.
It can't all be underwater labs and scuba gear, right?
Huh. No, it's definitely not all underwater adventures.
So what else is there?
Well, you could find yourself, let's see, analyzing samples in a lab, for instance. Or maybe you're at some coastal station monitoring sea levels. Or, get this, using satellites to study the ocean from space.
Whoa, wait, satellites. That's some next-level oceanography. Okay, but what about the not-so-glamorous stuff, the challenges of the job? What does RoleCatcher say about that?
Well, I mean, it can be physically demanding, that's for sure. You're dealing with rough seas sometimes, extreme temperatures, long, long hours.
Yeah, Pat.
And then you might have to spend weeks, even months away from home on research expeditions.
So not a job for someone who gets homesick easily.
Probably not, no.
Yeah.
You need to be resilient, adaptable, and have a genuine passion for the ocean, even when the conditions are tough.
Okay, so we've established you've got to have grit, you got to have a sense of adventure. But what about the actual skills that aspiring oceanographers need? RoleCatcher lists a bunch, but if you had to pick like the top three, the ones that are essential across like all career stages, what would you say?
The top three. That's tough, but I'd say critical thinking is huge, definitely communication, and then data analysis. Those are crucial, whether you're just starting out or, leading a research team.
Okay, let's break those down a bit. Why is critical thinking so important in this field?
Well, because you're basically problem solving, right? But in a really complex, interconnected system, you have to analyze data, see patterns that maybe other people wouldn't, draw conclusions based on what you're seeing.
It's like being like a detective of the deep. Okay, and what about communication? Why is that so important for an oceanographer?
Right.
I mean, isn't it enough to just, make the discoveries?
You'd think so, right? But it's not. You have to be able to share your findings and share them effectively.
So it's not just about the science.
Right. You could be writing scientific papers, presenting at conferences, even talking to the public. You have to make your research clear, engaging, relevant. That's how you get funding. That's how you influence policy.
So you're not just a scientist, you're like a storyteller too.
In a way, yeah. And an advocate. You're advocating for the ocean.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, and finally, data analysis. I mean, I imagine with all the information oceanographers are collecting these days, you've got to be pretty good with data, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Think about it. Sensor readings, satellite imagery. You're dealing with massive amounts of data, so you need to be fluent in statistical software, identify trends, all of that.
It's like you need to be a bit of a tech whiz, too, on top of everything else.
Yeah, pretty much.
Speaking of tech, RoleCatcher talks about how technology is kind of transforming the field of oceanography. What are some of the big game changers they mention?
Well, two big ones that come to mind are autonomous underwater vehicles.
Ooh, those.
Yeah, AUVs, and then remote sensing technologies. Those have been huge.
Okay, those both sound really impressive, but I'll be honest, I don't really know what they are. Can you break those down? Like, what makes them so important?
Yeah, so AUVs are basically underwater robots.
Whoa, really?
Yeah.
Robots in the ocean?
Yeah. And they can collect data for a really long time without needing, a human crew to control them.
So you can send them to, like, the bottom of the ocean,
Yeah.
places that would be too dangerous for people.
Exactly. I mean, think of the possibilities.
That's incredible. And what about remote sensing? What's that all about?
So remote sensing lets us study the ocean, but from a distance. We can use things like satellites, aircraft, even those sensor-equipped buoys. It's really changed how we're able to monitor like those large-scale phenomena, like changes in currents and temperatures.
So it's like having eyes everywhere.
Yeah, pretty much. And we can even keep an eye on, the health of entire marine ecosystems all in real time.
Wow. It's amazing how much technology has advanced just in, like, the last 10 years. So all this amazing technology, it got to be changing the career path for aspiring oceanographers too, right?
Oh, definitely.
So RoleCatcher breaks down an oceanography career into 3 main stages, right? Entry-level, junior, and senior. Can you walk us through each stage?
Sure. So at the entry level, you're really just trying to learn as much as you can. It's kind of like an apprenticeship.
So, like an apprenticeship for the ocean.
Yeah, you could say that. You're assisting with research, collecting and analyzing data, hopefully getting some, hands-on experience out in the field.
So then you kind of work your way up.
Yeah, as you get more experience, you move into that junior oceanographer role. More responsibility, too.
I bet.
You might be designing your own research projects at that point, presenting your findings, maybe at a conference or something, and even starting to publish your work, like in scientific journals.
So at that point, you're really, like, starting to make a name for yourself. Scientifically speaking, at least. What about when you reach, that senior oceanographer level?
Okay. So now you're seen as like a leader in your field. You're probably leading those big research projects, mentoring the junior scientists, collaborating with, other institutions around the world.
That's cool.
And a lot of times at that point, you're also the one who's responsible for finding the funding to support the work.
I bet that's not always easy.
Not always, no. But anyway, it's a pretty incredible career trajectory if you can, make it to that point.
It sounds like it. Although, let's be real for a second. RoleCatcher doesn't exactly sugarcoat things. I mean, they talk about the challenges, too. What are some of the drawbacks that aspiring oceanographers should be prepared for?
Well, the job market is definitely one.
Oh, yeah, I bet that's tough.
It's a very specialized field. Plus, funding for this kind of research can be super competitive.
So you have to really hustle for those positions.
Oh, absolutely. Networking is huge. Being persistent, and then just being willing to go where the work is,
So what, like relocate?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, some regions are going to have a lot more oceanographic research going on than others.
That makes sense. You'd probably have better luck finding an oceanography job on the coast than, in the middle of the desert.
Huh. Yeah, you'd think so. But yeah, geographically, the opportunities can be limited. And then, of course, there's the field work itself.
Oh, right. You were mentioning that earlier. Being out on a boat for weeks at a time.
Yeah. Right. And it can be amazing, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely not for everyone. You're away from home. Sometimes the conditions are pretty challenging.
Yeah, seasickness is no joke.
Tell me about it.
Hmm?
But RoleCatcher also mentions that it can be physically demanding. Like, depending on your specialization, you might be hauling heavy equipment, or collecting samples from boats, or even diving.
So you need to be more than just, like, a brain in a lab coat.
Yeah, for sure. You need stamina. You have to be physically fit and just be able to, handle whatever challenges get thrown your way. Because out there on the ocean, you never know what's going to happen.
Sounds like it. Okay, so we've got a competitive job market, potential relocation,
Yeah.
physically demanding work, not exactly smooth sailing. But for someone who is truly passionate about the ocean, I bet those challenges would seem pretty minor.
Oh, totally. If you love the ocean, it's all worth it.
Speaking of which, certifications. Does RoleCatcher mention any certifications that could give an aspiring oceanographer an edge?
They do. Some are pretty standard, like getting your SQBA diving certification.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you're going to need that if you're planning on doing any, like, underwater research.
Exactly. But there was one that kind of surprised me.
No. What was that?
Hazardous waste operations and emergency response certification.
Wait, what? For real? That sounds more like something out of a disaster movie than, like, a nature documentary. Why on earth would an oceanographer need that?
Well, it really speaks to, like, a side of oceanography that people don't always think about, dealing with pollution, environmental hazards, all of that.
So it's not all, like, pristine coral reefs and amazing
Yeah,
creatures.
it is that too, but it's also about understanding how human activities are impacting the ocean, and that can get messy.
So you're saying oceanographers are on the front lines of that.
In a way, yeah. They might study oil spills, monitor the effects of, different kinds of pollution on marine life, or assess how climate change is impacting ocean ecosystems, that kind of thing.
And that kind of stuff can be dangerous, so they need the Hazy Whipper certification.
Exactly. It might seem kind of random, but it really highlights how important oceanographers are, like, right now. They're not just studying the ocean for the sake of it, they're trying to protect it.
That's a really good point. So it's not just about scientific curiosity, it's about using that knowledge to help safeguard our planet.
Exactly.
It's a good reminder that we're all connected to the ocean, whether we realize it or not. And speaking of connection, RoleCatcher really emphasizes how important it is for oceanographers to be good communicators, especially when it comes to, like, explaining their work to a non-scientific audience.
Yeah, being able to communicate effectively is absolutely crucial. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's just as important as the research itself.
That's interesting. So, like, let's say you're an oceanographer and you're trying to get funding for your next big project. What's one thing, like a fact or a story that you could share that would really get potential investors interested and convince them that your research is worth supporting?
Oh, wow, that's a tough one. Um, Let me think. There's so many directions you could go with that, but I think if I had to pick just one thing, I'd probably focus on phytoplankton.
Phytoplankton. Okay. Remind me what those are again?
So they're like these microscopic plants. They live in the ocean.
Right, right. I remember now. And they're important for something, but I can't remember what.
They're actually essential to life on Earth. Like, we wouldn't be here without them.
Oh, wow. Really? Why is that?
Well, for one thing, they produce more than half of the oxygen we breathe.
Wait, seriously? More than half? I thought most of our oxygen came from trees,
Uh-huh.
like the rainforests and stuff.
Yeah, that's a common misconception. But it's those tiny phytoplankton that are doing most of the work.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah, and it's not even just the oxygen. Phytoplankton also absorb a ton of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
Which helps regulate the climate.
Exactly. So basically, these tiny little plants are having a huge impact. They're helping to keep our planet habitable.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it like that.
It really is. And that's just one example. The ocean impacts us in so many ways that we don't even realize.
That's a good point. So you're saying, like, understanding how climate change is affecting phytoplankton.
Hmm.
That's not just some abstract scientific question. It's about, like, our survival.
Exactly.
Okay, now that is a compelling argument for investing in oceanographic research. You'd have those investors handing over their wallets before you even finished explaining how phytoplankton are being impacted by pollution.
Huh. I wish it were that easy. But yeah, I think it's important for people to understand that connection. Investing in oceanography is really about investing in our future.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today. Who knew there was so much more to oceanography than, like, waves and whales?
It's a fascinating field, and there's still so much we don't know. It's a really exciting time to be an oceanographer, or even just someone who's curious about the ocean.
Totally. So to everyone listening, if you're hearing this and you're feeling that pull, that like urge to explore, don't ignore it. Dive in, learn everything you can. Maybe you'll be the one to make the next big ocean discovery. And until next time, keep exploring.